Hi, a beautiful world podcast with Summer Austin today. How are you today? I would like to go into my experiences in ambulances for your listening pleasure. So, anyway, here we go. Let's jump into it. It's a beautiful world podcast with yours truly, Summer Austin. So, have you, anyone, God forbid, had experiences in ambulances? Yes, I can remember 4 times, 4 experiences I had in an ambulance. Um, the first I was put in a straitjacket, and I did no harm to anyone. I was just jumping around in the backyard and screaming out my tension. The breaking point was that we were having steakums again, which is a very bland type of, like, meat that tastes like cardboard. And I wasn't talking, I was holding everything in for years as a teenager, so that was the breaking point. I was just like, "Ah." I jumped into the backyard, started jumping around and screaming out my tension that I hadn't spoken in years. So, I think I have the right to, have done that. I didn't, like, even make contact with anybody, so then they said, "Call the hospital," and then they put me in a straitjacket, and, they I was fighting them off, so they had to call in backup, and, I just said, "I'll go with you peacefully if you tell my mom where I am," and I tried to tell the neighbor who knows my mom's friend to tell him to tell her. So, they said, "Okay," so I laid down in the cot, and I went into the ambulance in a cot, and I said, "Wow, this is hot," and I said, "Can we take it off?" And they said, "Yeah, when we get there." I had a sense of humor at the time. So, I don't know if this is in, chronological order, but, um, well, there was a time I was put into an ambulance for, it was a, um, cop stop, and we had called the cops, me and my then significant other, on somebody who was throwing sticks at us or something. I don't know. He would always tell me to call the cops over nothing. So we did that, and then they took him. So what I did was I said, "You have the wrong person," and I started like acting up, and then they took me instead, and he was set free because I just I always do that. I like sacrifice myself or to save another person. So and in there while I was in there, I was all strapped down and everything, and then they wanted to know my life story. I'm like, "Thanks a lot, I don't feel like answering questions. I can hardly move or breathe strapped down in this cot." So, but I mean, they just took me to a psych center again and then just like let me out like the next day or something. It wasn't even into the center, it was just into the holding area. And they had someone like who I knew, somebody from the street watching over me while I was in there. It was sort of strange, but I think I might have even just left. I don't know. Then there was a time where I actually did get hurt and fall out a window, break my wrist, my feet puffed up. I had spinal cord injury and my elbow dislocated, but I was jumping for it to save my life, not for any suicidal reason. And um so I lived through that thanks to a person across the street who goes, "Whoa," as I'm falling, which made me keep my head up, I believe. Maybe keep my head up. So I lived through that, and it was from, like, a 3rd story window, and that was good. They just brought me to the ER, and, they had to cut my shirt open to take my hand bone out of my arm. They just yanked it out really quick, and I said, "Oh, that felt good." Kinda laughed, and then I was on the spinal cord injury floor, and, then they put me into the mental ward, and then Then they put me in long-term mental, um, housing, into the hospital, and then I got out and went to residence, and finally I'm free in my own apartment, but anyway, and then, the other time I wanted to mention was actually after I got into like a mental health apartment complex, and then I was next door offsite. And I was doing exercise in the bathroom, and I hit my head on the, um, counter in the bathroom, the sink on in the bathroom, as I was putting my head down really quick doing exercises, and I got like, a cut on the top of my head, and, like, blood was coming down over my forehead. I called to my roommate, who is now deceased from cancer, but anyway, it was a terrible time I had with her, but anyway, I was like, I won't say her name. I was like, "Can you help? Can you call the staff?" And so she called the staff, and they called 911. An ambulance came in. They were so bumbling. I mean, I brought like a sort of a towel with me for my head, and when I got like to the hospital, I just walked out because I didn't want stitches and I didn't want to be seen. I just said I'm gonna leave from right from the waiting room. I just said, is there I asked the guy next to me, like, "Should I go clean my face? Is there, like, any blood?" And he said, "No." So then I just, went out for a I asked if I could have a cigarette, and they said, "I think you should be seen by the doctor, miss." But then I was like I just went out, and then I just kept walking out. I left. So those are my experiences, and it healed on its own. I'm fine, with the doctor and the ambulances. Thanks for listening. Take your time. Peace. Have a good day.